Shoot Extraordinary Conference. I hope that you've enjoyed the last couple of days. This amazing education. As we head into the home stretch here, we are joined by the amazing Jackie Kramer. Jackie, how are you?
I am great, Michael. How are you? You've done a lot of work.
Yeah, well, it's teamwork. We have an amazing team here at Lensbaby, plus teaming up with you amazing educators and photographers from around the country and around the world. Of course, it's hard work, but everything worth doing is. So tell us quickly, for those who don't know, a little bit about you.
Okay, I was born and raised in Florida. I took off for college and beyond and lived in Alaska for almost 30 years and then recently came back to Florida. I'm in St. Augustine and I've been shooting since I was about 16, but recently turned to it full time in the past few years. And I discovered Lensbabies a long time ago, but I didn't really discover them until maybe about 5 years ago. And so that's what I'm excited to share with you today.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's funny how often we kind of find Lensbaby at one point in our life and then suddenly it's back. That was very much my experience getting my first Lensbaby all the way back in 2007. And then fast forwarding a lot of time and being here today. What can we expect in your course this afternoon?
Well, what I'm going to share in the Lensbaby Layers of Love session is how to combine images all shot with Lensbabies in Photoshop for interesting artistic effects. I shoot flowers, so of course I'm going to be concentrating on floral photography.
Awesome. Well, it's super excited. I can't wait to see it. Jackie, we can't wait to be in there with you. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the Q&A after.
Great. Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome. Let's do this shoot extraordinary. We'll see you in the classroom.
I'm Jackie Kramer, and this is Lensbaby Layers of Love. In this session, I'm going to share with you one of the techniques that I use to create my artistic floral images by combining multiple layers, all shot with various Lensbaby optics. I'm going to bring you into my makeshift photo studio here in our dining room to show you how I shoot some of the textures, and then we're going to dive into Lightroom and Photoshop and look under the hood at some of my editing. But before I begin, I'd like to share some examples with you of images shot with Lensbabies before and after layers have been added in this very short slideshow. Okay, I'm going to start shooting some textures. To begin with, I'm going to start with this glass candle votive, which is got a lot of interesting raised glass bumps on it, lots of curves, lots of little areas that will reflect and refract light. And I'm going to shoot it with my Lensbaby Sweet 50 along with both of the Lensbaby macro converters, the 8 and the 16 millimeter, and my Canon 12 and 25 extension tubes, 12 and 25 millimeters. Okay, so I'll be using a little Manfrotto Lumimuse light to shine some light into my subject. Set the votive down on its side. And we'll go into live view. And what I'm going to do is move in and out and hunt for colors and shapes, bokeh. And when I find things I like, I'll just grab them. And I know that I'm going to pair this with a floral image, but I don't necessarily plan in advance which one. I know in this case I'm going to be showing you how I edited the anemone. So I know I'd like to get some interesting textures to pair with that. I come in here and I can see that these bokeh bubbles are starting to take shape, really interesting ways. I'm not worried about the shutter speed because it's just a texture. So I can probably reduce my ISO here and lower the shutter speed a little bit if I want to. Then I'll move this around. So I can either move myself or move the subject, of course. And try to avoid these areas where I've got too much light and it's looking like it's blown out. However, if I find something like that and it's just a small area that I think I can remove in Lightroom or Photoshop, I'm not going to worry too much about it. Okay, I usually hold the camera gently against my neck like this. It's too hard to do this on a tripod because so much is going to be a result of me moving around. And I just can't be locked down. So if I really want to get something in focus, which right now I don't care about, but if I do, I'm on live view, I can actually magnify it and go in at this point and I'm going to give myself a little bit of stability here by pulling gently on the strap. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be doing or using for the anemone, this type of thing. Now I'm going to take it out of live view and I'll put my votive away and switch to the pink garland. So this is going to give me an interesting effect. And I'll start with the same configuration I have here, which is the Suite 50 with the macro converters and extension tubes. It's probably a little bit too much. So I can see here, it's going to be, I have to open my shutter speed up quite a bit. And I've got the low light, which is going to help render the color temperature more accurately. And I know that I'm probably going to pair this with a vertical image, so I'll just change my orientation. And now I'll take some of these filters or extension tubes off, so I can remove the two largest ones. And let's see now what kind of an effect we're going to get. Okay, so it's very nice. Love those little bokeh balls in there. Too bright, so I just adjust accordingly. And go vertical. Okay, and then I'm going to switch now to the Sol 45. And And I will pair that with the 25 millimeter extension tube. Okay, once I have that on, go back into live view with that. And let me just show you something before we go into live view. Like to just show you the bokeh blades inside the Soul 45 and 22. They have these two arms which can be engaged or not. And it gives you the Soul 45 is a beautiful lens. And it's lightweight and very affordable too. So I use this, every time I use it, I say to myself, boy, I need to shoot more with that lens. So anyway, the reason I put the extension tube on with this is so I could reach in and move these bokeh blades around. Otherwise, I would put a macro filter on the front of this, which is made by Lensbaby. Okay, so go back and we'll shoot a couple here first without the bokeh blades in. And this is beautiful. And we'll do some vertical. And then you can rotate the ring here, the focusing, not the focusing ring, but the locking ring. So there's a mechanism on it to lock it. If you rotate it to the left, you rotate it to the right, you can then tilt it, which isn't really going to make too much of a difference at all here. But when I get the bokeh blades engaged, you might see a difference. So let's go ahead and put those two arms in all the way. And we'll go to a vertical orientation. And while I'm there, I'll take my focusing ring and just move it around. Oh, I like this effect. So just kind of hunt around for a really nice effect. I'm adjusting my ISO and my shutter. And that's beautiful right in there. Put my Composer Pro back on. And I think what I'll do with the twist is just pair it with the, let's see, I'm going to use it just with the 16 millimeter macro converter. And let's see how that works. A lot of this is going to rely on experimentation. There's no magical formula for anything. In fact, if you take your Sweet 35 or your Velvet 56 and head outside, look up into the canopy at the trees, there's so many beautiful things out there you can shoot to. So look at that gorgeous swirl. A little bit of blown out area in there, but I can take care of some of those in post-processing. So I'm not too worried about that. Where's my light? Put the light back on this. And look at how gorgeous that is. So I'm going to tilt it now. I'm going to rotate my camera upwards, and I'm going to tilt up at an angle from the lower left to the upper right. And look at that. It's too bright. I've got to adjust my shutter speed. Down a little bit more. Okay, let's go with that. Okay, and then let's go, oh gosh, how can you can't stop. Then let's go straight up with the tilt. So straight up, and we'll come over here. I have to back it up a little bit. So it's not exactly straight, is it? There we go. And I just love, love, love what that does. So if you take the twist and walk outside and just shoot the ground, especially if you're on gravel, it'll give you a really nice swirl. Take it, make sure it's wide open so that your f-stop is as wide as it goes, and it should not be in focus, so that you start to get a little bit of focus around the outer edge where the center is pretty much a blur. And then when you use that as a texture, that is really nice, and it's more uniform so that you don't have any tilt at all. But then of course, if you want to, you can tilt it there too and really start to change the nature of the effect. Okay, so let's take all of those into Lightroom and then Photoshop and start to create some art. Okay, now that everything is loaded into my Lightroom catalog, I'm going to share with you some of my favorites. This was shot with the Sweet 50 of the pink garland. And then I have some here that were made with the Soul 45. Here you can see in the first two that I don't have the bokeh blades engaged, and then in the next three I do. And you can just look at the light spheres and see the direction of the bokeh blades. Next, I want to show you the results from the Twist 60, and you can determine the tilt here by looking at the light spheres or the bokeh bubbles. In the case of the left-hand image, I've tilted up from the left, and in the right-hand image, I've tilted up from the bottom. When you tilt the Twist 60, it will amplify the swirl and shift it toward the area that you're tilting away from. It's also going to significantly darken that area. So I compensated for that here in Lightroom by adding a graduated filter and increasing my exposure. Next are a few examples of the candle votive, the glass subject that I used. And here I'm looking for light, color, lines and curves, and interesting bokeh. Let me show you some other examples, all from that same subject. These have all had minor edits in Lightroom. And what I'm going to do with these is I'm going to pair one of them with this to achieve that, and then I will show you how I can take some of the pink textures and incorporate those as well. So to begin with, my base image is right here, and that is raw. That's how it came in. It was shot with the Spark 2.0. I put some minor edits on it just to mainly straighten it up, and that's the base. Look at how beautiful the focus is on that. And then the out of focus areas fall off to a really nice creamy effect. So I love this lens. Then we're going to add this texture, and I'll show you how I edited this. Let's go into the Develop module and reset it. So this is the raw image. I just put a little bit of vibrance and saturation on it, not very much, and that's one thing I love about the Lensbabies is you really don't have to do much at all to them, if anything. The main thing I did here though was move my temperature slider down toward the blue end of the spectrum and just cooled it down quite a bit to pair with the flower. So when I combine these two, my result is going to look like this. So we'll walk through those steps, and then I'll show you what it might look like if you were to add some of these others, either by themselves or in combination. So let's go ahead and follow my images into Photoshop. Photoshop now with our purple anemone. First thing I'm going to do is go get my texture layer. It's just next door, and I will select it all by hitting Command or Control A, then copying it to my clipboard by hitting Command or Control C. I'll navigate back over to my flower and paste it here by hitting Command or Control V. Once it's there, I'm going to lower my opacity so that I can see through it or beneath it to the layer below. And then I will add a layer mask by going down to the lower right and clicking the Add Layer Mask icon, which is the white rectangle with a black circle in the center. Once I have my white or Reveal All layer mask, I'm going to paint off the layer, off the texture, so that I can reveal my flower beneath it. So let's zoom in a little bit here, pick up my brush by pressing B, which is the keyboard shortcut for the brush tool, and making sure that I have black as my foreground color. I will make sure that I have zero hardness, and I will take my opacity down just a little bit, and I will begin in the center. And I'll increase and decrease the size of my brush by using my right and left bracket keys. It's helpful if I go in a little bit, and as I move outward, I will decrease the size of my brush as well as the opacity, so that when I reach the edge, I have a lower opacity and a smaller brush. Now this is going to vary depending on a number of things. The effect that you want to achieve, the background of the base image, which in this case is pure black, as opposed to something that's going to blend in better with this blue background. So if I had some foliage there, certainly it would be a different, it wouldn't have that hard black edge peeking through if I go over too much. So I just want to be careful with this. And I have a mask already made for you, so I'm not going to spend too much more time here, but I do want to point out to you that when you get down to the vase, you want this to look like it's emerging from the kind of billowing clouds of bokeh. So what I'll do is I'll start in about the low 30s with a very large brush and just start painting in here. And I'm going to do the same. I'm going to just decrease slightly, and in increments I'm going to lower my opacity down into the 20s as I shift downward, and then into the teens. And I think I'll increase the brush size when I get down here. Okay, so let me go get the layer mask that I already created for you. And pop that over on top. There we go. So I'm going to delete that, and we're going to go with one that I have already created. And just to show you what that looks like, I will press the Option key or Alt and click on the layer mask, which will allow you to see what I've done. Okay, so here is before and after. The blend mode is normal. The opacity is 70%. I'm going to back out a little bit and analyze it, and I think I could lower the opacity a little bit more. So I'm going to call that good at 59%. There's nothing magical about these numbers really. And what I believe I need to do next is balance the image out a little bit more. I'm going to duplicate the texture so that I can get some of those maroon bokeh balls over on the left-hand side. So to do that, I'm going to click on the texture layer and duplicate it by pressing Command or Control J. And then I'm going to unlink it from my layer mask, which is really important because I'm going to move that layer around, and I don't want to move the layer mask around with it. I want that layer mask to be connected to the flower beneath it. So all you do is just click on that little link beneath it, between the layer and the layer mask. Then on the layer, I will hit Command T or Control T on a PC, and it's going to give me a bounding box with these little white handles. I can increase or decrease that by pulling on any of those little white squares, and it will increase or decrease symmetrically. If I want it to go asymmetrically, I just depress the Shift key and hold that down while I pull in any direction. Now, just a side note that I should have made this a smart object before we started, but I'm not going to do that for the purposes of this image or of this video, so that it will be a lot faster as we go. Okay, so I just want to get this stretched where I want it, but before I go anywhere else, I'm going to flip it. So I will right click and go flip horizontal, and I will lower the opacity so that I'm not completely obscuring the layer beneath it. And I'm going to shift it into a place where I feel like it blends nicely. And then I can commit to this either by clicking on the check at the top or hitting Return or Enter on my keyboard. And now we have that in place. and I'm going to probably keep this around the low 30s in the opacity. The next thing I'd like to do is make the colors richer. The flower is very deep and very saturated, but the background, the texture layers that I just put on, they could use a little bit of enhancement. So I'm going to go back to my original texture layer, and I'm going to duplicate that by pressing Command or Control J, and I'm going to drag that to the top. And I like it already. It's just basically doubled up on that normal blend mode, but you can see that it's now obscured the layer beneath it. So I've kind of just covered up what I've done below that. So I'm going to lower the opacity a little bit. I'm in the high 40s right now, and I'm going to change the blend mode. Let's have a look. I want it to be richer, so I'm going to probably select one of these 5 options in the second batch, starting with the word darken. Those 5 blend modes are going to make my image darker. The multiply blend mode is typically the one that I'm going to use when I want to make my colors deeper and more intense. So you just hover over each of them and you can see the effects. The next 5 are all going to lighten the image. So in this particular case, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to stop here on multiply, and I'll just lower the opacity down and have a look at what it was like before and after. And I think that looks a lot better. Okay, and I'll typically go in and, I can see I had some typos in there. I'll put this at multiply blend mode, so I'm going to just write that there. This one is texture at normal, flip horizontal. And then this one, correct my typo, is texture normal. Okay, and finally, what I believe I'm going to do is just soften up some of these petals. The spark is beautiful, and sometimes it's actually really crisp. So even though this was shot just 2 stops off of open wide, I still have a lot of clarity in here on the petals, which is gorgeous, but I want it to soften a little bit more into the bokeh and the background that I added to it. So I'm going to create a stamp layer, which is going to merge all of my visible layers. I do that by hitting the following 4 keys: Command Option Shift E. Or on a PC, that will be Control Alt Shift E. Don't worry, I have a handout that I'm going to provide for you through Lensbaby, which has all of this written down. Once I have that there, I'm going to duplicate that layer and just turn it off. I just want to make sure that I have that preserved, and I'm going to leave all of these as they are, and I'm going to just play on this one stamp layer. So let's just label it stamp and Gaussian blur, because that's what I'm going to do. So to soften it up, I'm going to go up to the top under the filter menu, and I will scroll down to blur, scoot over and down to Gaussian blur. And once I'm there, I'm going to go, I don't want it to be blurred too much. So here's one end of the spectrum, and here is the other end of the spectrum. I want to be right around here. And this is overkill, but I'm okay with that because I can vary the opacity of this layer itself. So what I'm going to do is, since this is acting globally on the entire image and I only want it around the petals, I'm going to add a hide all layer mask by hitting Option or Alt. At the same time, I click on Add Layer Mask. That will give me a hide all layer mask, a black layer mask, which is concealing the Gaussian blur layer that I just created. I'm then going to pick my brush tool up again by hitting the letter B, and I'm going to exchange my colors by hitting X on the keyboard or this little switcher here, so that white is my foreground color. And I'm going to change my opacity here to about 30 some odd %, making sure that I have 0 hardness on my brush, and I will brush white over my petals, just like that. And I can see over here that if I look at my layer mask, I have clicked it, and when I got off of it just by accident, and you can just fix that by painting with black at 100%. So if you want to see your layer mask at any time larger, just again hit Option or Alt and click on the layer mask. Okay, so let's see what that looked like before and after. I'm going to paint a little bit more into the center with a smaller brush, and let's make sure I'm painting with white at a very low opacity. Let's get it down to the high 20s. Okay, there's nothing real magical about this number. And let's bring it in a little bit towards the center. And let's turn it on and off. I think that was probably a little bit too much on and off. I'll just lower the opacity of this layer a little bit. And let's turn it on and off. Yes, that looks good to me. So let me zoom in a little bit more so you can see what I'm doing here. This is before and after. It just takes a little bit of the edge off, before and after. Okay, so Command 0 will fit my image into the screen. And I can then go back and I can erase some of these, but I'm not going to because I want to retain the ability to make changes later. So when I'm done, I'll go ahead and save it by hitting Command or Control S. I'll save it right back into my Lightroom catalog, and then I can have a look at what some of the other textures might do with the image. So let me just first go back through what we've done here. This is where we started. We added the texture layer here at normal blend mode, 59% opacity with a layer mask. I duplicated it and flipped it horizontally, unlinking it from my layer mask. This is at normal blend mode, 32% opacity. I then went in to my original texture layer and duplicated that, dragged it up here to the top, and I multiplied that. So I changed the blend mode from normal to multiply at 33% opacity. I then finished it off by adding a slight Gaussian blur on the petals around this. It was some of these pink texture layers might do. So I've turned the blue group off, and we'll start with the Sweet 50. I'll turn that on, and I have it in screen blend mode. Screen is one of the 5 options that are going to lighten the image. So because I'm putting a light color over the black everywhere that the pink exists, it's going to lighten the base image. So let's increase the opacity and bring it up in the high 60s. And it just kind of makes my vase and flower look like it's coming out of a cloud. I would probably go back in, and since I've turned off the underlying layers, I'd go back if I was going to choose just this alone, and I would Gaussian blur that flower once again. I did the Sweet 50 image as a virtual copy and then brought that over here as well after putting a radial filter on it in Lightroom. And so it's just an oval of pink and gives it kind of a spotlight effect. I'm using the same layer mask that I'd already built previously. So let's turn those off and look at the Twist 60. This is the Twist 60 layer. It's also in screen blend mode. This is at 54% opacity, and I have a gradient fill layer mask on this. And I also added a hue saturation layer. This hue sat layer is clipped to the underlying layer of the twist, and in that I have adjusted my hue, my saturation, and the lightness. So I brought the hue down towards the green and the saturation just a little bit lower, and I brought my lightness up. So if you want to see what it looked like before and after, and we'll turn that off and we'll go up to the Sol 45. And here is the Sol 45 also at screen blend mode, and I will show you the opacity increasing up to the mid 70s. It kind of looks like fire. I just love the way the the Sol 45 blends with my images. And now if I want to see what that might look like with the pink layers underneath it, I just think that is incredible too. It kind of looks like fire coming out of this pink cloud. And I might add the spotlight effect back in there, and then How about if we turn the blue group on and lower the opacity of some of the pinks to let the blue come through? And I think that's beautiful. The possibilities are endless. If you like all these options and you want to save each separately, come up under image and go down and duplicate and save each one with a different title. So it'll prompt you to save it with a certain name, and then you can just say okay or browse it it's going to save it in another tab here in my workspace in Photoshop. But then when I save it out onto an external drive, I just need to make sure that each one is going separately, and I save them either as PSDs or TIFF files so that I preserve all of my underlying layers. Okay, that is it for my anemone. Let's have a look at some of the other images that I've done. Under the hood, we can look at a very simple edit here of this hot pink cosmos. This is the original image with a little bit of editing. I edited in Lightroom, but did very little to it. I took it into Photoshop and basically only had a little bit of fun with the petals by liquefying the edges and just drew them out a tad. I then added that same Sol 45 texture that we were just using right here. And that was added in overlay blend mode at an opacity of 80%. And I just drew a very light-handed mask on it. So with and without the mask, it would look like this without, and this with. Okay, I then duplicated that along with the mask, but then I doubled down on the mask by painting a little bit more on it to remove that second layer. Why did I add a second layer? To accentuate it. It's also in overlay blend mode, but instead of 80%, original was 80%, I reduced the opacity to 56%. There's nothing magical about the numbers. Well, but the reason I did this was because as an alternative to just boosting the opacity of the first layer, if I add a second layer, I can now modify the blend mode. And so I can multiply, I can overlay, I can do soft light, I can then go into some of the other funky ones. So if you want, you can just hover down and see what things look like as you move through the different modes. I actually liked it pretty intense. So I left it at overlay, but I felt like it was getting too dark and intense in the upper right and imbalanced and bright in the lower left. So what I did was just flipped my texture. So I duplicated it. And here's what I'll do. Let me show you what I did. I will hit Command or Control J. Okay, I'm going to unlink it from my layer mask, which is important because I want my layer mask to stay in place. I'm going to take that layer, and by the way, I should be using smart objects, but for efficiency's sake in demonstration, it's just easier and faster to do it this way. So now I'm on my layer. I want to flip it around. So I'm going to hit Command or Control T, and let's find the outer edges of that. And let's spin it around. About like this. So I want the dark black area in the lower left corner, okay? So let's zoom in now so you can see it. If you want to see the outer edges of your texture, you have to zoom out or magnify out. And you can do that by Command or Control minus, or you can just get to the outer edges once you're in free transform or anywhere, but by fitting to screen by hitting Command or Control 0. So let's say okay to that. And here's before, and there's after. Again, before and after. If I want to adjust my opacity, I can do that here. And if I want to adjust, I see the corners have gotten black, so I can do that again. Command 0 to see the whole thing. Let's tilt it just slightly and bring it down a little bit. Oh, I don't think that's going to fix that corner in the lower left, maybe the lower right, if I brought it down just a smidge more. Okay. And then we'll Command or Control plus so that you can get a better look at that. And look at this. If you add that one on and duplicate it, oh my gosh, that's like beyond anything I normally ever do. Okay, so there's that one. Next, this is a very simple edit. Let me show you how this one progressed. From the beginning, this was shot with a Sweet 50. Everything looks nice to me, but I just put a little bit of Gaussian blur on it. So I duplicated the layer, put on a Gaussian blur, and I created a hide all layer mask and just painted it in around the perimeter on the upper left and around to the right hand side. So before and after, it's just a very small nuance. I don't even know if I needed to do that, but I didn't know exactly how the texture was going to interact with this. So I thought, you know what, I'll smooth it out over here and up there. So there we have it, Gaussian blur layer. And that is normal blend mode, of course, at 100% opacity. But since it was such a small amount, I didn't really need to adjust the opacity of that. Okay, then I added this texture layer, and this texture looked like this. It's also the same votive that we've been shooting. There's 100% opacity. Okay. And I just reduced the opacity just a little bit. And the blend mode, I changed to overlay. And that was that. All I did at the end was I just liquefied this leaf right there because it looks a little bit too straight. Here's before the texture. You can see that there's a leaf there, but the reflection on the top part turned that color a little bit toward the bluish side. And when it mixed with the texture, it kind of looked lavender. It looked like a straight line. So I just liquefied that slightly in that stamp layer. So what I did here, just to show you, is create a stamp layer, Command Option Shift E or Control Alt Shift E. And then I went into my filter, liquefy. And I got a very large brush and just adjusted this. Just like so. And you say, okay, when you have it to taste. So this is the way I did it originally, so I'll stick with that. So that is the final image here. This is before and after. It's amazing how sometimes it's just so simple. Let's see what else I have for you. I have another texture shot with the Sol 45. Beautiful peachy pink colors kind of going into the waves of green. And I use that one over this image. So I'll do a quick walkthrough of this one for you. This is before, shot with a twist 60. The first thing I did was duplicated the layer and cloned out that extra orchid down at the bottom that was detracting from the flow. So took that out by cloning it. And then I added a Gaussian blur layer above that, put on a layer mask so that it was removed for the most part from the areas that I wanted to be clear. I then added that layer that I just showed you with the Sol 45 in screen blend mode at 100% opacity. Added my layer mask on that. I duplicated that in overlay blend mode because it made the colors deeper. Look at particularly the left-hand side of the image. I felt like it was a little bit too dark, but I'm going to adjust that later. But I like where this is going. So of course I'm bringing my layer masks on. I'm making some minor changes on my layer masks. If I want to remove some of the layer itself, the texture layer over it from what's below, I'm just copying the mask that I created and then amending it accordingly. I then added this layer on. This one looks like this. And it's also shot with a Sweet 50 and that glass photo. So this is normal blend mode, 100% opacity, no layer mask. And here's the layer mask. Here is the lowered opacity to 46%. And there is the addition of that layer. Now, almost done. I duplicated that and I changed the blend mode to overlay, amended my mask slightly, took a look at it, decided that I felt my flowers were starting to get a little bit dark. So I added an adjustment layer at the top, a curves adjustment layer, and I masked that. I masked that in. I put a gradient layer on it, and then I masked it into. So I removed that brightening off of the upper right diagonal and also off of my main flower, with a little bit removed off of the secondary flower. So there you have that, before and after. Okay, so I'll stop my screen share now. And see if you have any questions.
Dreamy artistic images.
Emotive and soulful imagery.
That extra recognition and quirkiness.
Really unique images.
Se olvidaron completamente.
Extraordinary results.
Creamy bokeh and a dreamy feel.
Creative and quirky landscapes.
Unique blur effect.
Fun flares.
Poetic, oniric look.
Something extraordinary.
Wow, sheer extraordinary conference. I don't know about you guys, but I just learned so much. And I'm going to need to go back and spend some time in Photoshop because I don't know as much as I thought I did. Jackie, how are you, my friend? Welcome. Let's see if she can. Jackie, are you there? We're live. I don't know if Jackie knows this. If you can see me, I'm waving to you. Well, while Jackie is getting live with us, I want you guys to...
I'm here. I'm here. Can you hear me?
There she is. Awesome. She is starting our conference. Please leave your questions for Jackie in the comments.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Can you hear us? Oh, it's the joy of live, guys. So let's give her a moment and see what we can do. Let's see. We can hear you, Jackie. So many questions.
Hear me?
Throw them in there. She can't seem to hear us, but we can hear her.
I am in Restream.
Yeah, she's in there. Well, you know what? It's just technical difficulties. Guys, we're live is what it is. Why don't you hang tight for us for a moment? I'm going to throw this guy up, and we'll be back in a second.
Can you hear me now?
Hey, folks, we're going to try it one more time. Hey, Jackie, can you hear me now?
I hear you. Can you hear me?
There we go. Magic.
Okay.
We'll take off the technical difficulties notification since we are, in fact, no longer having technical difficulties. Amazing presentation. Short Extraordinary, one of the things that Jackie wanted to mention is we are going to be uploading the videos again. We noticed that it's a bit cut off in the reshare. That's just because of the downsizing from this platform to the internet. So next week, we'll be sharing all the presentations from scratch. So in the meantime, if you have questions for Jackie, please put them here in the chat and comments, as well as know that we will be sharing her handout on the landing page for the conference. We'll have more information about that first thing tomorrow. So Jackie, thank you so much for the amazing presentation. As I was saying earlier, you know, I thought I knew a lot about Photoshop, but that was this amazing deep dive. And I think you did something really special there by giving us the experience of using Lensbaby in Photoshop in a way that most of us probably have not thought about. What's your journey been like to this amazing discovery?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for being here. It's really a privilege for me to be with the other luminaries. And I want to, express how much I appreciate all that you did. This whole conference was your vision. And I know how much work went into it. So thank you, Michael. And thank you, Craig, for your work and your ideas and your dreams and making them a reality. So it's really a privilege to be here. Yes. I want to do a real quick shout out to all of the fluorographers out there. I love you guys. Thank you so much. And to everybody else who may not have known me before, but thank you very much for bearing with the fact that my screen was cut off. So yes, we will fix that later. But my journey was that I noticed that there were some really, really interesting effects that I was able to achieve with a variety of combinations. I love like tiny things. I've done a variety of artwork, including working with small seed beads. And so I love the beauty in the tiny things. And the Lensbabies just bring this effect out, and they give you this sort of a dream that you can't really achieve any other way. But you have to be really, really, really close, or sometimes really, really far. And when you are very, very close or very far, that's not necessarily what you need to be shooting with or at the distance with if you're going to shoot a flower or a person. So sometimes you can get it all in one fell swoop. So for example, you get this wonderful swirl with the burn side or the twist along with your flower or your person or whatever you're shooting. But sometimes you can't. Sometimes you're right up close and you get the flower and a nice creamy background. But what if you want to pair that with something that's really cool, but you can't get it unless you stack up all these extension tubes, for example? Or maybe you take a sweet 35 and you go outside and you shoot up into the trees. You can't do that and do the other at the same time. So it's kind of like having your cake and eating it too.
Yeah, I love that. And there's such a beautiful juxtaposition in the fact that, you know, this is something you can do in camera with Lensbaby, and you can do it in post. And, you know, there's no rule that says you can't do both. There is no rule that says that you can't have your cake and eat it too. And I appreciate that. We'll dive into some questions here from Sherry. For us mere mortals, is there a secret to pairing textures with images?
I have no secrets. I just showed you everything I do. It requires practice every day and experimentation and learning. I'm constantly acquiring new skills, even if it's a minor thing, even a nuance in Photoshop or a nuance in shooting. Like, I've already learned so much from all of the presenters before me. And if I walk away with just 3 things from this, I will be a better shooter, and I will have more poetry in my head to put through my lens in the future. So just keep learning, keep shooting, and keep experimenting.
Yeah, that's great. And so much of this is just in that, is learning and experimenting, because, you know, for anyone who's spent any significant amount of time in Photoshop, they know what you just showed us takes years of practice. I assume you did not come out of the gate being able to do that in Photoshop.
Oh no, I was, first of all, it took me at least 3 years before I was extremely proficient in Lightroom. I really feel like you have to ride the tricycle before you get on the bike. And then once you're on the bike, you don't go racing up and down the steep hills until, you know, you feel pretty confident. And so I was intimidated by Photoshop in the beginning. And I had some issues that I couldn't deal with in Lightroom, like getting rid of distracting elements. You can only go so far in Lightroom. So at some point, if you're going to really make peace with things and salvage some images, that if not for just this one little thing, then you're going to end up taking a dive into Photoshop. But that's just the, you know, the toes stepping into the shallow end of the pool. If you continue going in and you start to acquire those skills and learn how to apply them creatively, that's where the fun and the magic come in.
Yeah, absolutely. Could not agree more. I'll answer this one. How do we get the handouts, Jackie? We are going to post that on the conference landing page. So you can look out there at lensbaby.com/pages/conference. That is where they will be. Question back to you here, Jackie, from Jack. Can you discuss the pros and cons of extension tubes versus macro filters? I saw that you use both.
Okay, when there's certain lenses, like for example, the Sol 45, if you want to be able to access those bokeh blades, you can't put a macro filter on front of it, or you're gonna have to continually unscrew it. And then you're gonna, you know, have fingerprints and smuts all over the macro filter. So I would put an extension tube on if I want to get closer with the Sol 45. Now with the optic swap system, any of the suites or the twist, even the new Spark, and for those of you who shoot with the Edge, that's probably the only optic I don't use much. Then you have another option. You can use the macro converters by Lensbaby. So if I'm out in the field, I'm almost always only going to use, with the optic swap system, I'm either going to use the Lensbaby 8 or 16 millimeter macro converters. Those slip in and screw in between your optic and the Composer Pro housing, or a macro filter. And the macro filter comes in a kit of a +1, +2, and a +4. The macro converters come in a set of 2, an 8, and a 16 millimeter. Get them all, because eventually you're gonna have, if you don't already, you're gonna have more than one optic. And what I like is that I don't have to keep screwing them on and off. I'll just leave 1 or 2 macro filters to screw on at the end. I'll leave them on one optic. Maybe the other one will have a macro converter. And maybe if I take them all off, they go in my bag. But if I limit myself and I only have one set of one or the other, then it becomes like a little bit of a mess. I was really impressed with Shelly's organization. Yeah, I am so disorganized because it's just not my style. So I have a bag. I like to travel as light as possible, and so I will take my all of it with me. The extension tubes have plus and minuses. If you use the extension tubes, you may experience like a loss in light, but also it's also going to inhibit it's going to change the nature of the sweet spot when you tilt these suites with the Composer Pro, any of them with the Composer Pro. When you tilt anything with an extension tube, it's going to, you know, your fulcrum or your tilting point is going relative to the distance from your sensor is going to be different using the extension tubes versus using the macro converters. But I don't really recommend that you go full tilt anyway. So
yeah.
Hopefully that's
a super great point. Yeah, because they obviously extend. Jackie, we're running out of time, but I want to ask one more question before I bring Craig on. And that is, so many people have asked, what is your favorite Lensbaby?
That's not a fair question. Do I really have to answer it?
I mean, yes.
Well, right now, that's going to be tough. I really like the twist. I really like the twist because it allows me to stack up a couple of, maybe even just one macro filter or one 8 millimeter macro converter, just one, or maybe 2, and I can get close to my subject and I don't even have the twist. It becomes almost like a sweet 50. Craig may have a different perspective on that, but that's sort of been my experience. I haven't had the twist long enough to really know. But then I love that swirl around it. So a lot of people use vintage lenses, but why would you when you can get everything in one? So I like that swirl all the way around. And I think I mentioned when I was showing the demo on shooting textures that if you just go out and shoot a gravel driveway, you can get that swirl around it, a very faint image. And then you can use that as a layer on top of something else. Or you can just get that around your flower if you step back enough without all the macro filters and converters. If you step back enough, you can get that beautiful twist. So I like the twist for its flexibility. So since you forced me to pick one, that's it.
Well, this entire conference is about growing and getting out of our comfort zone, Jackie Kramer. Thank you so much for being here. Shoot Extraordinary Conference. Hang out. Craig is coming on with me right now. Jackie, thank you, my friend, and we will see you soon.
Thank you.